as being the ninth largest economy in the world. Now, as a worldwide economic shock aggravates the toll of a global pandemic, the key role of innovation funding is strengthened in a post-COVID world. The challenges for Brazil are big. We have a diverse and uneven economy. Historically, we have been like islands of efficiency and prosperity, coexisting side by side with poverty and other social problems, such as lack of access to quality education, healthcare, and several basic public services. Technical progress is known as one of the main drivers of economic development. However, innovation does not happen automatically or is driven only by market forces. Brazil must choose innovation unequivocally as the main development strategy of the country to strengthen its competitive, to create wealth and prosperity, inclusion and sustainability. Innovation creates strong positive externalities in the economy. The social benefits of innovation far outweigh private ones, justifying public funding in this area. Like innovation in healthcare, even so it generates greater profits for those who innovate, innovation also creates several social benefits, such as improving people's well-being and increased life expectancy. Innovation results from robust and ongoing investments in research and development. Risks associated with innovation progress are greater than for traditional investment projects, which makes market interest rates for these projects higher. In Brazil, economic risks directly associated with innovation are aggravated by political, macroeconomic, and social uncertainties. Therefore, the costs of investing in innovation are even higher than in developed countries. The high cost of capital and the risks associated with innovation limits companies' willingness to invest in R&D and innovation, making it necessary to build a broad, effective, and well-structured framework of public policies supporting R&D activities. A fundamental issue is how to guarantee the stability of the resources available for research in the country. R&D is a long-term effort subject to a series of uncertainties. Therefore, it's necessary to provide some predictability and for the availability of funding sources to guarantee the continuity of these efforts and to produce significant results. The public sector has a fundamental role in assuring this predictability. However, it's precisely because of its shortcomings and weaknesses that Brazil should reinforce its efforts on scientific and technological development. New technologies can contribute to reduce chronic problems by improving public services and allowing for more efficient use of natural resources. For that to happen, Brazil must ensure significant and stable investments in science and technology over the years. The private sector must expand its investment in research and development as well. The National Confederation of Industry, Brazil, faces the challenge of improving the competitiveness of Brazilian industry by influencing the policy environment. CNI represents Brazilian industry, 27 federations of industry, and over 1,000 employer unions, to which almost 700,000 industries are affiliated. These actions, based on studies and technical research, as well as on consultations and ongoing discussions with industrial federations and unions, domestic sector associations, forums, and business councils. CNI also coordinates MAI, the Entrepreneurial Mobilization for Innovation, created in 2008 with the aim of incorporating innovation into the the strategy of companies operating in Brazil, as well as of improving the effectiveness of innovation policies and the innovation ecosystem in the country. May supports a positive agenda focused on expanding the innovation capacity of industrial companies operating in Brazil. We are working to turn innovation into a strategy designed to promote Brazil's economic, technological, and social development. Due to its importance, especially in Brazil, innovation funding is one of the items on the agenda of May. The priorities proposed by May to turn Brazil into an actually innovative country includes, besides restructuring the innovation financing system, improving the quality of education at all levels, training professionals, developing long-term planning and an appropriate infrastructure for science, technology, and innovation, and evaluating the effectiveness of the policies being presently adopted by local industry. The increasing participation in this mobilization of the most important leaders of Brazilian industry that have been investing in innovation in Brazil lends legitimacy to our pleas to the government and consolidates improvements in the innovation ecosystem for the Brazilian economy to grow. No other Brazilian initiative has involved so much effort to understand the specificities, challenges, and assets of the Brazilian innovation environment. Through suggestions and recommendations, May contributes to the making of more effective public policies, improving the financing system, and strengthening the culture of innovation. The role of CNI as a knowledge partner of GII since 2017 is a May initiative intended to highlight the innovation capacity and performance of Brazil in comparison with other economies, pointing at what should be done to change the country's competitive status. Today, we will have a recorded participation of Robson Andrade, the chairman of CNI, as he couldn't be with us, and presentation by two editors of the GII. Bruno Lanvin, INSEAD's executive director for global indices, will present the report's key findings, and Sumitra Dutta, professor of management and former founding dean of SC Johnson College of Business, Cornell University, will delve into details of Brazil's performance of GII in 2020. After their speeches, we will open the floor for questions and comments. The audience questions can be posted in YouTube and Facebook chat. Thank you, and now we will see a video from Robson Andrade, the chairman and president of CNI.
Em nome da Confederação Nacional das Indústrias, da CNI, eu cumprimento a todos aqueles que participam do Índice Global de Inovação de 2020. Para nós, da CNI, é um prazer muito grande estar participando desde o início, em 2007, e o Índice Global de Inovação, além de ser uma grande referência para pontuar os países que investem em inovação, em tecnologia, como eles estão melhorando e avançando, também é uma importante referência para o aprimoramento das políticas públicas, das políticas voltadas para a inovação, para o desenvolvimento das indústrias e de todos os setores econômicos. No Brasil, nós ficamos felizes de termos avançado um pouco nesse índice, mas ainda estamos longe daquilo que nós queremos. O Brasil hoje, como a nona economia do mundo, ainda tem investido muito pouco em inovação e tem políticas públicas que ainda precisam ser aprimoradas e melhoradas para que possa contribuir com as empresas e contribuir com o ambiente de negócios que nós vivemos, para que a inovação seja uma referência e um norte para toda a economia brasileira. A Confederação Nacional da Indústria, desde que liderou a mobilização empresarial para a inovação, a MEI, que hoje é constituída por mais de 300 empresas, grandes empresas brasileiras que atuam no Brasil, internacionais, mas que têm a inovação como um dos seus pontos mais fortes, tem contribuído muito para que o Brasil possa adotar políticas e possa mudar legislações que favoreçam a inovação no nosso país. A mobilização empresarial para a inovação também tem um papel fundamental para fazer com que as empresas brasileiras coloquem inovação no seu planejamento estratégico como sendo a primeira referência e a primeira forma de fazer com que as empresas, principalmente industriais, após a pandemia que nós estamos vivendo e durante essa fase que nós vivemos no mundo, tenham possibilidade de crescer, desenvolver, de competir num mercado globalizado, não somente em busca de preço e de qualidade, mas em busca de produtos inovadores, de produtos que realmente possam melhorar a qualidade de vida de toda a população. E nós, na Confederação Nacional da Indústria, temos um grande prazer de contribuir, de participar do Índice Global de Inovação. Para nós é fundamental e, juntamente com a mobilização empresarial para a inovação, com a MEI, com todos os empresários brasileiros que participam desse importante projeto, nós estamos firmes na busca de que o Brasil continue melhorando sua posição entre os países mais inovadores do mundo. Temos a certeza absoluta de que nossas empresas só serão realmente grandes e participarão de um mercado globalizado a partir dos investimentos em inovação e que esses investimentos são aqueles que darão o maior retorno para todas as empresas agora, durante essa pandemia, mas após essa pandemia, as empresas que estarão fortalecidas são aquelas que realmente investem em inovação. Além disso, nós temos procurado contribuir muito com laboratórios, com institutos de inovação, aliados aos maiores centros de pesquisas e de desenvolvimento do mundo e buscando principalmente que os recursos financeiros necessários para as empresas inovadoras no Brasil estejam disponíveis e a custos compatíveis com a necessidade das empresas brasileiras. Muito obrigado a todos, parabéns a todos, uma grande oportunidade de falar com vocês. Obrigado.
Well, we just had the presentation of Robson Andrade, the chairman of CNI. And now, please, Bruno, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pedro. It's a pleasure to be in this event. So I'm going to say a few words about the main results coming from the 13th edition of the Global Innovation Index that was launched 2 days ago globally, and we are happy to launch in Brazil today. But first, I want to insist on the fact that this is a cooperative effort. Cornell University, INSEAD, and the World Intellectual Property Organization have joined again as co-editors, and we are extremely grateful for the support received from CNI as a very faithful knowledge partner. This year, again, the report covers more than 120 countries, so it's a worldwide report. And of course, the media give a lot of attention to the ranking. So I'm going to say a few words about the ranking, but we insist on the fact that the report is not just a ranking. It aims at being a tool for action. So we have chapters, we have a theme, and every year we try to bring additional elements to the way people not only think about innovation, but implement innovation policies in their respective countries. So starting with the ranking, we have, again, a large degree of stability at the top. The top 10 are Switzerland, followed by Sweden, the US, the UK, and the Netherlands. So we have there a number of small countries like Switzerland, like the Scandinavian countries, and a relatively large number of European countries. But a massive shift that we see in this year's report is a shift toward Asia. We have 2 Asian countries in the top 10, Singapore as number 8, and Korea, who breaks into the top 10 this year. And not far behind, we have China, which stays at level 14, where they were last year. So we have a strong Asian component. As I said, we have remarkable stability at the top. We have one relatively large move by France that moves from 16 to 12. It is symbolic and has attracted a lot of attention in France because this year France gets over China. So that's always the kind of things that people like to notice. We have to see next year what is whether this is a continued dynamics or not. In the same global picture, Latin America as a whole has been going down. Not to mention, of course, Venezuela that totally got off the radar screen. We could not even get data this year. We have Chile, who used to be the star of innovation in Latin America. Chile moved down 3 ranks. Other countries like Peru, like Argentina, have been moving down 7 ranks. So it is quite interesting, and Sumitra will tell us a few words about it in a minute, to see that Brazil has been different from the rest of Latin America this year. And we also see a similar downward trend, like for Latin America, for the Middle East. Most of the Middle East countries have been going down, and we are still trying to identify the reasons why this was a regional phenomenon. But as we just heard from the president of CNI, policies matter. The role of leadership in indicating that indeed innovation is a key priority for the country is a crucial ingredient in determining the performance of countries in the innovation index. So let me now say a few words about the theme of this year, which is innovation financing. The situation of innovation finance was pretty good until COVID struck. Venture capital was very dynamic. Sovereign funds were getting into the game and taking more risk. So we had a pretty good scene, encouraging scene at least. We also had signs that venture capitalists were diversifying. There was less concentration of VC funds towards unicorns and more funds made available to smaller firms at initial stages of innovation. In other words, venture capitalists were hedging their bets and ready to take more risks vis-à-vis smaller firms. The situation, of course, has been very much affected by COVID. GII 2020 does not reflect the data that will really measure the impact of COVID. That will emerge only from the national reports and business and country reports coming at the end of this year. Yet, from the analysis, a few signs appear. And I would like to flag 5 concerns that we have on the side of the research team behind the GII. Concern number 1, financing will get scarce. Even if recovery packages, as we've started to see in China, in the US, in Europe, in Japan, in other countries around the world, are massive. That is, countries accept to get into huge amounts of debt to actually help their economies recover. It is likely that a certain portion of these recovery packages will go to addressing the most urgent needs of the time. Many companies will go bankrupt. Many people will lose their job. The IMF estimates that 1 billion people worldwide will go back to the level of absolute poverty. Inequalities will increase. So recovery packages will have to address these immediate needs. The concern is that there should remain due attention to, as Pedro Bonchavski mentioned earlier, the continuity in financing innovation. Financing innovation is a marathon race. It is a long-term race, and discontinuity means money and energy is being lost. So the way in which recovery packages will be articulated will be critically important to help us identify the shape of the recovery and the role that innovation will continue to play in different parts of the world. What I would like to add as a personal point of view is that the longer countries wait to articulate recovery packages, the higher the pressure to address short-term immediate needs, which conversely means that the longer it takes to articulate a recovery package, the more likely it is that innovation support will suffer. A second concern that one may have about how COVID will affect the innovation scene is the rise of protectionism. The collapse of multilateralism is one aspect of the collapse of international trust and cooperation. And what GII has showed us since it was created 14 years ago is that innovation flourishes when two conditions are met. The first one is when national economies are open, not just open to trade and investment, but open to ideas, to innovation coming from outside, and to collaborate for joint research. The second lesson is that when multilateralism diminishes and disciplines collapse, we go into competitive innovation as opposed to cooperative innovation. And money is lost, energy is lost, collective optimum is diminished. This is what we are starting to see in the search for vaccines, whereby instead of cooperating massively at the international level, we have a race between countries trying to identify who will be the first to get a vaccine to the market. All this is detrimental to innovation as a whole. One last point is that it is natural to expect that innovation funding will focus very much towards health and health-related aspects where innovation is needed. We should not lose sight of the fact that we have global challenges to face. Climate change, reducing inequalities, reestablishing trust. For all of those, innovation is crucially vital and needs support. That should involve not only private funding, but public funding. And given the fact that recovery packages will be key to determining the future of innovation, public finance will be one thing to watch and probably the key ingredient in success. So let me stop here and leave the floor to Sumitra, just reminding all of us that innovation is not just a question of money. It is a mindset, and leading by example is what all innovators expect in that field. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruno. Sumitra, please.
Thank you very much, Pedro. I would like to echo Bruno's word of thanks and thank CNI for the support of the GII project for many years. But I also wanted to thank you, Pedro, for your role as a very valuable advisor to the Global Innovation Index. So clearly we've had a very strong support from the Brazilian community. My colleague and co-editor Bruno talked about some of the overall results. As far as Brazil is concerned, this year Brazil ranked 62nd amongst all the countries included in the GII. And if you compare it to last year, it was ranked 66 last year in 2019 and ranked 64 in 2018. So definitely it is an improvement over the last 3 years, but it is a modest improvement. I think Brazil should take that both as encouragement, yet at the same time motivation to do more in innovation. Now, you can obviously download the report from the Global Innovation Index homepage, which is Global Innovation Index, one word. So it's globalinnovationindex.org. There you have all the details of the performance of Brazil, not just on any one aspect, but on all the different indicators which go into the Global Innovation Index. You also have all the details of the performance of other countries, because that is also very important. The race for innovation is a global race, and it's a race in which different countries are trying to outcompete others in the efforts to become more competitive and to create wealth. Now, let me sort of begin with what I think are 2 or 3 very important messages for Brazil. Again, I'm simplifying out here because a lot of data in the report, and I encourage you to look at the details online. But the first message really is that leadership is important. And when I talk about leadership, I really mean leadership from the top. The president, the cabinet, the ministers, the various heads of states, the heads of cities, at each and every single level of the country, the leaders need to articulate a vision of why innovation is important. For making change happen in a country, the articulation of why is very important. Why should we focus on innovation? And the answers out here actually are very important. It's not just only for creating economic wealth. Yes, innovation helps to create economic wealth, helps companies, small companies be created and startups become bigger and bigger companies become more global. But innovation is also very important for social value creation. You have a lot of young people in Brazil. You have a lot of talented people in Brazil. And these young people, this talent of Brazil, need a way to express their talents, need a way to do and bring and create new things and new services. And for that, innovation is very, very important. It's a way of expressing the best of what we can do as society, as human beings. So it is the sense of fulfillment that is very important. People are excited and motivated and inspired. If you look at just the heads of countries and you just take, for example, look at the speeches or hear the speeches of President Xi of China or Prime Minister Modi of India, and I'd encourage you to go back 6 months before the pre-COVID days, because COVID clearly has, changed priorities in the short run. But if you go back 2-3 years and listen to what they said, you will be amazed at how often they said that technology, innovation is so important for the future of development, of progress of these countries. And indeed, the same is true also for US. I'm in America now, and as you know, President Trump is quite infamous for creating a lot of noise on different topics. But amongst all the noise which he has created, what he also has done has focused the American mind on the race for innovation with China. Now, he may have done it in his own way, but today, every single American, or at least most Americans, are aware that there is a global race for innovation with China. And Americans know that we have to win this race. So in Senate, in Congress, there is bipartisan support for government investment and innovation. Despite all the different budget cuts which President Trump has made in many other areas, the area of science and technology has in fact received increased funding. If you go to the White House website, you'll be amazed to see the kind of information that is professionally presented on artificial intelligence, which America regards as one of the key areas for future innovation. So what I'm just trying to emphasize is that leadership from the top is essential, and you need to be able to focus the country on the fact that innovation is key for global success, and that is happening in most countries where you see innovation national priority. The second thing I wanted to say is around businesses. Clearly, private business and private business leaders are very important drivers of innovation. In almost all countries, a lot of patents are created by private businesses. And here, I think Brazil's record is mixed. On one hand, it has great companies, great corporate leaders. And if you look on one of the pillars of the Global Innovation Index is titled Business Sophistication. So how capable, how sophisticated is the business environment and the business leaders of the country? Brazil is ranked 35 in the world. In fact, higher than its overall ranking of 62nd. And clearly you have very good knowledge workers. So on the knowledge workers, the quality of workers in the companies, you are ranked 32nd. But one of the areas of weakness is innovation linkages. So what this shows, innovation linkage, your ranking is 62nd. What you see is that Brazilian companies are perhaps not that great in forming those innovation linkages, be it linkages to universities. And I have many colleagues in Brazilian universities who tell me that, unlike in America, professors in Brazilian universities are not really rewarded for getting corporate grants or research grants from companies. At Cornell, if I get a grant from a company, that actually is a positive for my annual evaluation as a professor. And that is not necessarily true in most universities in Brazil. So the interlinkages between universities and companies is not necessarily as strong. And if you take, for example, the state of cluster development, Brazil is ranked 55th in the world. So once again, not necessarily bad, yet an area for improvement. So clearly in areas of business, Brazil has strengths, but a lot more can happen on those dimensions, especially as you look at small businesses. I think one of the areas where Brazil or Brazilian businesses suffer the most is in small businesses, where if you look at the ease of starting a business as one indicator, Brazil is ranked 106th in the world. 106th. And this is not necessarily something that is very difficult to improve. I think with some focus on institutional policies and regulations, the Brazilian government can actually change many of these factors, whether it is the ease of starting a business, whether it's the kind of incentives of businesses to invest in R&D, and so on and so forth. So I think the whole area of business sophistication, I think, is important. The record of Brazil out there is mixed. On one hand, great companies and great talent, but a lot of more investments can be made on that front. The third message I would take really is around education. Education is very, very important for any society. And Brazil has great human talent. In fact, in many ways, Brazil invests a lot in human capital. Today, it is ranked 49th in the world on the whole, if you look at the entire pillar of human capital and research. And on a specific indicator like expenditure on education, Brazil is ranked 12th in the world. So Brazil is spending quite a lot of money on education, but however, there are weaknesses. So if you look at, for example, the performance of high school students in Brazil on the PISA scale. The PISA is a measurement done by the OECD in Paris. On the PISA scale, Brazilian high school students rank 68th in the world. If you look at the number of graduates in science and engineering as a proportion of the entire Brazilian educational pool, Brazil ranks 81st in the world. So once again, I think more investments in science, engineering, mathematics needs to happen in Brazil. And that's an area where clearly I think further improvements can be made. I already mentioned the element of linkages to universities and Brazilian linkages between universities and companies. That's another area. And in general, I think Brazilian universities can be incentivized to invest more in R&D. Investing in R&D is very good, not just only for the students, but also for the economy. If you think about a university like Stanford University, and you ask the question, what has been the impact of Stanford University on American economy? Clearly, Stanford University has attracted a lot of great talent, professors and students around the world, and they have created a lot of interesting new ideas and inventions in the university, funded often by both companies and the US government. That has been great. But I would argue that an even bigger benefit of Stanford University is all its graduates, which have in fact been trained extremely well, which have seen the benefit of R&D and have gone on to create companies. And those companies have in turn created and innovated and created tremendous wealth and new ideas and inventions in the country. So investing in the quality of science, technology, education, investing in the quality of universities is extremely important. Now, let me close by making some comments on what and how does all this fit in the global scenario. So this global ranking that we produce in the Innovation Index is very important to note that it is a relative ranking. It does not say that Brazil has not been improving. It does not say any other countries have not been improving. It just says how fast are you improving compared to others. And what we are noticing is that Brazil is not necessarily moving fast enough. And that's a very important message. Yes, Brazil is improving, but it is not moving fast enough. And why do I say this? Is because other countries like India, for example, have improved faster in the same time period. China, of course, is an exception. China has moved to position number 14, but even a poor country like India has moved to position number 48 in the world. Clearly, a lot of potential for India also to do better, but Brazil should and move faster. Now, in this post-COVID world, one can argue and certainly question the level of investment that companies and governments will make in innovation. And I think the jury is still out. One has to wait and see how the situation will evolve in the future. But my optimistic hope is that the pace of innovation will in fact pick up. Why do I say this? Is because if you look at the last few months, the pace of innovation that has happened in many sectors of learning, education, remote work, remote collaboration is tremendous. No one would have ever thought that we would see this kind of wide use of remote technologies for learning and work and collaboration around the world. And the digitalization that has got accelerated will, I think, bring further innovations in the years ahead. So what I believe is that innovation stands a good chance of picking up pace in the years ahead, and technology changes will be a key driver of that. And Brazil has tremendous strengths in terms of human assets, tremendous strengths in terms of physical assets, And I think Brazil has to really become one of those leading nations that are seen as innovative in the world. You know, I have come to your lovely country many times, and I love your country and love the people. And the brand of Brazil is something I often refer to. If you ask an average person in Asia, in Europe, America, what is the brand of Brazil? They'll often talk about soccer or the sand or other samba, fun, good things. But you also want them to talk about silicon and about technologies and about innovation. And even in areas of physical resources, today there's a lot of innovation happening. For example, in digital agriculture, I know Brazil is making moves in digital agriculture, but there are more than 300 digital agriculture startups in Israel, more than the number you have in Brazil. Why do you think Israel should have so many digital agriculture startups? It's because they're actually applying digital technologies to agriculture. And this is something which is becoming a big export area for Israel. And it can be also a tremendous strength for Brazil. So I think Brazil has tremendous strengths. The world is moving fast. And I think Brazil has to accelerate. So a lot of great strengths, but acceleration of the speed is something that I would recommend. And this can only happen if the key stakeholders, the government, private society, and the businesses come together to make it happen. Thank you very much. And I hand the floor back to Pedro.
Thank you, Sumitra. We will have some time for questions. And I'll ask both Bruno and Sumitra the first question, and then we may have questions from our audience. As you may be aware, Brazil is about to launch a new national innovation policy. My feeling is that the results of the GII, not the general classification, but each of the items that composes the index, should be a good guide to where are the key subjects that the Brazilian government should deal with in order to progress and to be seen as an innovating country. Do you have any of you, do you have any specific points that you would like to address or to point out that should have the special attention of the Brazilian government in designing this new policy?
Let me begin, and I'm sure Bruno might have some points to add. I already spoke at some length about what I think are some recommendations of Brazil, but I would commend, CNI and the May initiative and the leadership of Brazilian leaders and the head of the May initiative, Gianna, to influence the policy, influence the national policy. I think this policy should be set in a collaboration between the government and industry. And this is what I think is a very necessary act to make the policy more stronger. I think the policy should also seek government leadership. Even in every single country that I know of, which is doing well in innovation, the government is an active leader and participant in the innovation process, including in the US. The US government is very heavily engaged in promoting new technologies and supporting the local industry in those areas. And I think this is something which should be part of the national innovation policy of Brazil. And then, of course, I once again emphasize the various elements I talked earlier about branding, about education, about companies, and about overall leadership is very important. I hand over to Bruno for his comments.
Yeah, thank you, Sumitra. Clearly, based on the elements we just heard from Sumitra, we know where some of the weaker points are of the innovation landscape in Brazil. And as Sumitra mentioned, some of them are not so difficult to tackle. So attacking this low-hanging fruit first, which would create a better climate for improving the ranking in GII, would already be a first step. The second, as Sumitra just mentioned, is strengthening the ecosystem. That is the collaboration between business and government, and I would add academia and research is critically important. This is what the champions of innovation show us. There's one additional element, which is if we look at how the top-ranking countries are doing it. If we look at Switzerland, for instance, it has a very well-balanced performance across all 7 pillars of the GII model. So it's not just addressing the weaker point, it's also aiming at a balanced performance between pillars like education, like financing innovation, like providing the right institution, the right regulatory framework, etc. The role of leadership, as Sumitra mentioned, is critically important. Innovation likes role models. So if your leaders are supportive of innovation, it's very important, but they have to incarnate innovation. They have to be seen as innovative people themselves, in their mind, ready to try new things, to experiment. And this is where I think in Brazil, which is a federal economy, a federal country, the role of the states and the role of cities is particularly important. You have a number of agencies supporting innovation at the local level, at the state level, and they have significant resources. So those can be mobilized to identify what are the local needs, because what the population will want is not just to know that the country is branded well as an innovator. It's also, does it create jobs? Does it make my family better off? Is there a future for my children which is better than my own future? These are elements that are part of a true and sustainable innovation policy. So the younger generation, and is critically important in Brazil because of the demography. You have a young population, and this younger generation want to contribute in a meaningful manner to society. They want to change society for the better. So giving them hopes, giving them ambitions on how they can address the future means that innovation should also be linked to what I called earlier the bigger challenges. Whether it is the SDGs, whether it is other objectives, giving the younger generation a way to say, yes, it's not innovation for the big companies and the technologists among us, it's for all of us and for our society is critically important.
Thank you, Bruno. One of the questions I just received notes that the GII 2020 uses mostly data from 2018. Different governments are reacting differently to the economic crisis caused by COVID. How do you think the different reactions of the government, of different governments, will impact the relative position of the countries when the data of 2020 actually will be used and available for the GII, will affect the GII? How, it's a difficult question to answer, but how will these different approaches of the different governments influence their position on the GII in, let's say, 2021 or 22?
Okay, so maybe I'll begin. Bruno referred to some of the different ways in which different people are putting out packages to overcome the crisis now. And I think if you look at, for example, the different possibilities, you can, of course, support businesses directly. You can support people directly. If you look at, for example, in Europe, the general approach has been to support businesses to keep people employed. In America, the general approach has been to support people who are unemployed, let businesses shed employees and support the employees. If you look at, for example, what China has been doing, is China hasn't really been doing much of supporting employees or supporting businesses per se, but has been putting packages to invest in new technologies, in new growth areas. So if you look at the investment packages right now, they're actually investing in 5G and AI and those areas as part of the recovery. So as part of the recovery, what they're doing is ramping up the investments in those growth areas for the future. So the question really about how will this translate into rankings in the future? I do think that the countries that choose to invest in growth areas for the future will, in general, tend to have more competitive industries. Of course, companies and countries need to also invest in the human capital. People are very important and different ways of doing it, as I said. But I think investments in the right areas for the future will, in fact, help a country's ranking improve just simply because they'll become more competitive globally.
Yes, I totally agree with that statement. And as I mentioned before, we're still fighting the sanitary crisis. Okay, it is not over, and even when we have a vaccine, which may be in 1 or 2 years, it will not be over. But the real crisis has not started yet. The economic and social crisis we're only anticipating, and this is where we will need to get innovation to its full speed. One of the consequences of COVID could be summarized as government is back. In many areas where we had a tendency to rely on private initiative and private dynamism of markets, we see that this will not be enough. This is why we need this huge public spending deficits, which means debt for the next 25 or 50 years. So it's a big bet which has been made on the future. Clearly, the data of GII this year do not reflect that, and we can only try to anticipate. But the difficulty in these recovery packages will be to not be totally hypnotized by short-term urgencies. What is the longer term? We are a little bit like somebody in the middle of a road, and the road is collapsing on right, on left, behind you, ahead of you. So you mobilize lots of money to put pavement on the road. You put bricks ahead to help you take the next step. But at the same time, you have to think of the big gap coming in front, and you have to start thinking of how you're going to build a bridge when you get there. And if you wait until the last minute to build your bridge, it's going to be too late. History will take you down the gap. So doing the short term and the long term at the same time is a very, very big challenge. But innovation is exactly about that. It is about using the present to build the future. So this is why financing and supporting innovation is not only a critical element, it's also a symbolic element of how different countries will react to the crisis.
Thank you. We have several questions here from the audience. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll have time for all of them. But one interesting question relates to role model. I think Sumitra and Bruno both said about the importance of role models regarding innovation. In that respect, if Brazil should look into what happened in other countries that managed to raise fast in the rankings, what could we learn from these countries specifically and apply to Brazil, so to take them as role models? Which countries would be those that you would mention?
Bruno, you want to go first?
Well, its role models should be comparable. That is, if you tell a very small country in the middle of Africa that their model should be the US or China, it is not very credible. Brazil has two types of role models it can try to identify. First, it's one of the biggest countries on the planet. So Brazil has reasons to look at what's happening in the US, what's happening in China, what's happening in India, and in other large countries, especially when they are federal countries, because many recipes can be applied. At the same time, it is a middle-income country. So he can look at other middle-income countries and see what they've done better in education, in relationship between universities and business, and try to apply these lessons. There's never any cookie-cutter approach that works. You don't adopt a practice, you adapt a practice. It has to be fitted to your own culture, habits, and constraints. Of course, it is also interesting to look at what the smaller economies have been doing. Why is Singapore, why is Switzerland so high in the ranking? Is there something that they'll know that we don't know? That's always interesting. But identifying the degree of comparability and remembering that it's not about adopting, but about adapting, for me, are key principles to follow.
Yeah, I would just add two small elements. One is, of course, Brazil is a large country, but as Bruno mentioned earlier, it is a federal country with states and cities. And you can certainly compare what is happening in Sao Paulo to what is happening in Singapore and a small country. So I think the comparison can be made at different levels. And the second thing that I would mention is today, our knowledge of innovation is quite good. It's not that innovation is a mystery, is a complete black box, and no one knows what's happening inside. I think we know, by and large, some of the good things that countries do to become innovative, that succeed. The challenge is not knowing, challenge is doing. So I think the execution is the key issue. I think we all know what is to be done. We look around and we can have 10 principles. May has produced many great documents on this already. And I'm sure the National Innovation Policy will be a wonderful document. The issue is moving from document to execution. And that's the execution gap that I think is important. I don't think the issue is ideas per se, it's the issue of execution.
Well, thank you, Sumitra. We are coming to the end of this meeting. I will have, please, Bruno, your closing remarks, and then Sumitra.
Very, very quickly, innovation is about the future. The future is about young people. So as long as we don't get younger generation excited about innovation, it's not going to happen. So any kind of support that can be brought to younger innovators through education first, but also through support to startups and younger firms is critically important.
Thank you.
Yeah, my word, Pedro, would be, I said a lot already about Brazil, but my thing would be build the brand of Brazil in innovation, both internally and externally. I think you want people in the world to identify Brazil and say, yes, that's an innovative country. I want to actually go there, set up my company. I want to work with companies from Brazil. I want Brazilian leaders. So I think building the brand is very important.
Okay, thank you both, Bruno, Sumitra. It was a pleasure to have you here today. And I think Brazil has a lot to learn and from the GII. I think the GII is a wonderful route for Brazil to know exactly what has to be done. But your last words, Sumitra, are very important. One thing is planning, the other thing is execution. And we probably have had more plans in the past that we were able to execute. And we expect that this new industrial policy which is under design by the Brazilian government should close this gap from planning to execution. Obviously, you have to have the right ideas, the right plans on the first place, but execution is as important as the plan, as the idea itself. So thank you, Sumitra, thank you, Bruno, and thank for all that have been with us for this last hour. And we hope that we have discovered and developed a new large number of friends of innovation in this country through these presentations today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.